Good afternoon. This is Randy Brunson with Centurion Advisory Group on the podcast Stewarding Family Wealth. In the studio today, we have with us Drew Gilbreath of Sutter, Mclellan Gilbreath Insurance Agency. Drew, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Randy. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And then also we have in the studio Cole Porter with Porter Steel. Cole, glad you're here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. This is our second episode. In the first episode, we talked for a while just about your business and what you... We ended up focusing on employees. How do you hire well, train well, make the right fit? When you're an employer, an owner, responsible for a team, that's always a topic of conversation, right? How do you get the great people, serve them well, treat them well, help them do well, hire them well, those kind of things. So we spent some time there. Both of you, though, are second-generation owners. And Drew, I think you shared with us in the first episode, you started working with your dad, or you were around the agency. The agency predates you.
Correct.
Right? And so you grew up with it. You worked there in high school, filing papers?
Filing papers, absolutely.
That kind of learning how it worked, what the office looked like, who the people were, those kind of things. Porter Steel is a custom steel manufacturer.
Yeah, steel fabricator and erector.
There you go. Thank you. See, you say that so much better than I do. But you also worked for your dad both in the shop and in the office?
Sure, yeah. In high school, I was working in the rail shop, grinding rails and kind of learning how the fabrication process worked, and then did some administrative work after college or during college, and then after that was project management and senior management.
You learned to weld?
I know how to weld, but I'm definitely not certified, and I wouldn't put a beam up that I'd welded.
I understand. A cousin of mine owns a custom fab shop, and they make pressure vessels for the natural gas industry.
Yeah.
And they have external engineers that come in and certify them to code, to standard. Right. My cousin's name is Jody, and he's a bit younger than I am, but he's a welder. Not by training profession, but he's absolutely mastered it and has a certification, because those pressure vessels have to have, they're
ultrasound. I think the welds are ultrasound.
That's right. They come in with ultrasound machines to make sure those welds are just so, because they ship these to natural gas wellheads and pressurized, and Drew, you know the liability there.
Yeah, you can't make a mistake.
No, you can't make a mistake. So I've just heard Jody talk about the welding and crawling up inside these huge vessels and welding, and he doesn't care for it, but he knows how to do it. So that's a very particular kind of thing. So this episode, let's talk about the transition. So Drew, your dad started what is now SMG Insurance in '77, which is almost 45 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so he was in his 30s, I suppose, something like that. Sounds like.
Late 30s, yep.
Yeah. His 30s, young family, starts the business. You grew up in it. All right. And then over the last 15 years, the ownership and management responsibilities have come to you and your partner.
Correct.
Talk about just what are your observations about your dad's operating style, management style, business building style? What did you see there? Let's start there.
Well, my father, when he merged with Sutter, Mclellan Gilbreath, he picked up a partner who was the operations manager.
Okay.
And they kind of had a yin and yang to them, as far as he was the leader of the sales team and she led the operations of it.
Okay.
When she retired in 14, I slid into her role and started to kind of, as much as I'm like my father, started to be able to stand, eye to eye with him and realize where he was going and where we might need to go somewhere else, take a different turn. Sales is great when you're sales is always great, I should say, but as we grew, it got to the point where we had to really make sure we were transferring responsibilities, seeking out more efficient ways to do things. Business is very different when you're 10 employees than when you're 35.
Right.
And those are things where I had to kind of step back and, away from, I guess, my natural programming, because he and I are very similar.
Okay.
And just kind of see, okay, maybe this is where we need to go. This is, take a different approach, as opposed to let's just go sell something and that'll make everything all right.
Yeah, that solution, let's just go sell something and then it'll all work out. Let's go create the sales mess and then figure it out after the fact.
Correct.
Yeah. So so your dad did sales, and then when he merged there in '92, then he had an operations person to come along do the inside operations component. But when you stepped in 7 or 8 years ago now, did I hear you say, or maybe been reading between the lines, about 10 employees at that point?
No, we were still about 30 at that time.
Okay.
Yeah, we grew. The largest the business has been was 42 employees in 2008, and the Great Recession took us down into the 20s.
Okay.
We do a lot of construction insurance, and that was just not a good time to be doing construction insurance.
That's right.
So we've built back up from there, and it's been an interesting transition. I mean, I don't think I'd be where I am without my father. As far as a willing teacher, he's excellent. He did have the tendency to look at me over his glasses like I was the dumbest person to ever walk in his office. But he was always willing to answer my questions, always willing to help. And a lot of people say, well, you work for your dad. How hard can it be? It's incredibly hard if you're worried about disappointment, if you're worried about, letting him down. It's not a silver spoon necessarily. It's more of a just higher intensity environment.
Talk more about that, because you have an operations role, and your business partner leads a sales team. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, where your dad was oversaw the sales teams, and one of the other partners at that point, when he merged, oversaw the operations. But talk about that, what you were just talking about, that difficulty of working with your dad and expectations and all that.
I mean, there wasn't really a difficulty as much as a standard.
Okay.
We talked in the first episode about culture and defining what we want in our mission statements. That his generation is more so lead by example. I mean, his staff watched the way he operated with integrity and with a very high capacity to just keep going. I mean, he was always working, always moving us forward, and now it's a little bit different in the sense that I do have to put these things on paper and communicate mission statements and goals and cultures, and it's just a different environment altogether. But working for him, he was a great teacher. That's kind of the takeaway, and he was patient. He wasn't really my boss, if you will. I could walk in, and I did not call him Dad. That was something everyone said, why do you call your dad by his first name? I'm like, because just so do you. So why would I call him Daddy in the office? That doesn't make any sense. But you also have a little chip on your shoulder from that aspect of, it's not a silver spoon. It's, I'm here because I earned it. I'm here because I'm going to do my best to be as good as I can for everybody, grow the place, and go from there.
So the other employees, are you the only second generation person at the agency?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just curious. I don't think I've ever asked you that before. Just happen to be curious.
Oh no, excuse me. We have one other employee. One of our sales agents is second generation.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. But what about the other employees? As you certainly you were there during high school, but in 2004 you stepped in full time, things like that. What about the other employees? Was there some perception that you had been given this because you're the son, or
not necessarily? Because I'd been there so long, and we brought in because it's my partner and I. She's our lead agent, so it is not a. I'm taking over because of who I am.
Right.
We're going to run this together.
Right.
And I wasn't going to do it without her. I mean, she's taken us to great heights, and the staff as a whole, though, it was very different managing in 2014 when everyone was old enough to be my parent. Most of them. I mean, when I first started in 2004, we had a couple ladies who could tell stories about me in diapers. And they would right in front of anyone and everyone, and as a early 20s,
that's embarrassing.
Your ego gets checked at the door pretty quick. It was pretty bad, and so you have to kind of have some humility and build up to being someone's boss. They've taught me everything I know in some regard. I mean, that's some of these people. Some of our employees have been with us 30 plus years. I manage them very differently than someone I hired 6 months ago. it's a very different relationship because they've been loyal, they've been professional, they've done a great job, and managing them is, I don't say you don't have to, but it's different. It's very different.
And a number of those have retired over the last couple of years, but still there are some there that probably went to work for your dad or the Sutter Mclellan 30 or more years ago. And
Absolutely.
Have known you since you were young, elementary school, middle school, those kinds of things. So yeah, those relationships then would be different than someone you've hired 6 months ago where, you've been the owner and the manager since the day they met you. That's a very different relationship. Any nuances that just come to mind that?
Really just the demographic shift from I was naive enough when I came into management to think that we have all these employees and they've all been here 20 years and they'll retire one by one, and when they do I'll find one other person and they'll work here for 20 years, and that's not the way it works, especially not today. And so we've had to work very hard at being very good to our people to create that loyalty again. And you also have to take a step back and look at, wow, my dad was doing this right. To have these people for this long with almost zero turnover is amazing.
He was doing either is part of it generational, or
I would think some of it has to be generational, but some of it is and a lot of it is they had a great group and they were settled. They got along very well, very good culture, and enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And up until everyone started retiring, it was pretty. There were no openings. It
Right.
was interesting.
You mentioned something about your dad, sort of just being the example. I myself have thought that I'm at a point in life where, sometimes when I'm sitting in the morning with coffee and in silence, which I treasure because it's so rare.
Sure.
Just sit there in silence and reflect on life in the day and get prepared for the day. I've thought to myself, I wonder if I'm at a point with children, grandchildren, team members at the office, whatever my world looks like, right? Is there really any difference that I can make other than simply setting a good example? Here's how you handle your relationships. Here's how you handle your money. Here's how you handle your time. Here's whatever it is, because what have we been given? Time, talent, and treasure, that phrase. How do you handle these things? And at some point, just say the word. Just set a good example. I don't know the answer to that question, but it was interesting to hear you say that about your dad, So, I don't know. Cole, talk to us. You stepped into Porter Steel. You've worked there off and on, but you stepped in full time in 2017.
That's right.
So right at 5 years now. Mm-hmm. And you've worked in a number of you've filled almost all the roles.
A lot of them.
Right. And when you came back in 2017, what role did you step into at that point?
So I was a project manager at that time, and about 2 years prior to that, I left Porter Steel as a project manager, and part of that was that my dad was still working. And going back to some of the things that Drew said, it's always been very difficult in our family to separate business from family. And so and like when I said the last episode about Porter Steel being my bigger brother, like it always was. So it's always, my dad and I have had very few conversations in life that didn't in some way reflect or involve the business in some way. Now that's not true. We've had personal conversations, but a lot of our life is centered around our relationship as it relates to the business. And so that was really difficult, especially with him being there every day, me being there every day. And so for the health of our relationship, that's when I was like, well, I'm going to step aside for a little while. And then when he retired, that's when I came back, because it's a lot different, him being the owner and being semi-retired away from here. Not in the day-to-day, so that we can kind of be our own people and not have to butt heads so much, I guess. And I don't know that it's necessarily butting heads, but it was just more, it's hard to have your dad right down the hall from you, and especially if you guys don't have a super delineated, like we're at business now and then we're at family later. So that was difficult. But so when I came back in 2017, he had been retired from the day-to-day. And so it was much easier for me to be able to work and do the things and prioritize and go after the goals that I had. But there's some of that where people, you have to fight against that too, the silver spoon aspect, where people think, oh, well, you're only here because, you're family. And I think that it's just a matter of time that you have to prove yourself and prove that your intentions are pure, and that you bring skill to the table, that you do deserve the position you're in. And then from there, after the promotions, I think were evident that they were, the right thing to do at that point, after I'd kind of earned the respect of the people that were current. But we have a lot of employees that have been there for over 30 years. So my dad's first employee is still an employee. So it's weird. One of our lead men in the field, who's a great erector, he knew me when I was born. So it's hard to make policies that directly affect him, or to tell him how to do things or what he should do when he literally saw me, in a diaper or in a stroller, so.
Right. Somebody referred to that one time as a diapered butt syndrome. And it's sort of like as your parents' age, because both of my parents are gone now. Teresa, my wife's name is Teresa, and between us we have one parent remaining, and it's her mom, and, she lives with us. And, but right, when you're, Mom, I think it's time to move you from home. We need to move you into care. It's too demanding on Dad. And, being the oldest son, I was elected to have some of these, I was the heavy, and my sister's a nurse, so she could take care of that component. But yeah, it's different when that diaper butt syndrome, your opinion doesn't count, right, or something. But you've overcome that just by your work there, and like you said, your approach with people, your relationships. So you've been able to move beyond that thing where you're here just because you're the son, right? Yeah.
And I think my dad's a classic baby boomer, and I'm a millennial, as they call it. So, we do see the world a little bit differently, and just as culture changes, I think that just the different perspective on how to, we've got to execute business, and it's about the profit margins and all those things, but it's also about, people don't just come to work because you told them to, or because you're writing a paycheck anymore. They are looking for other things in a place of work besides just the pay. And so it's seeing that and kind of trying to address some of those issues and creating that culture in that business that people do want to work for.
What do you find, speaking of that, and I have a question for you in just a minute, Drew, but speaking of that generational change, what are you finding? What are they looking for that's different than that paycheck? I mean, I could make some assumptions, but I'd rather hear you talk about it. What are they looking for that's different than just, you have a job now and you have benefits and you get vacation now and again? But
right. I mean, I think that the people that we want to attract to our business, I think that they want purpose in their work. So they want to go home and talk about something they've accomplished, or a goal that they're helping the company reach, even if it's a very small part of that. I think they want to be very clear on what they're providing, and then also that they're appreciated, and that they are that they're recognized and appreciated, and not recognized in this big glamorous way, but just that I would recognize that they are a valuable part of what we do. Because ultimately, there's so many different positions in our company, but every one of them, regardless of their pay or the hours they put in, they're an integral part of getting the job done and getting the check, right, from the customer. So any of those removed, we have lack, So I think that purpose is really huge, and then also just the family environment that we've always had. I think that's one reason why a lot of employees have come back to us, even maybe after they've left, because they see in other places that it's much more rigid and much more corporate, I'll say, and we're more of a family, and we, and that's to our detriment sometimes, but it also is one of our greatest strengths, I think.
So what are some of those nuances, practical things that you found that matter, that can help people experience what you're describing? Because if what I'm hearing is, your dad was sort of like Larry the Cable Guy. Let's just get it done. Just get the work done. But what are some of the practical steps that you and the other leaders have taken to incorporate some of what you're saying into the business?
Well, yeah, I mean, to my dad's credit, like, he has always part of the family atmosphere, even before health insurance was even a thing that politicians talked about. my dad saw what a bad injury could do to somebody if they didn't have good health insurance. And so we've always made it a point in our company to pay for the employees' health insurance 100%. And so, that's a great benefit that a lot of people don't do. And it was just something that we saw as valuable. We want to make sure that they were taken care of from a medical or a health perspective. Now, there's a lot of other things that go along with it, and recent things that we've done have been completely to revamp our PTO. I want people to have time off, to be able to enjoy their families, to be able to take appointments if they need to, and not have such a, and you get it without doing anything, right? So, like, you show up on day one, and that first year you're accruing PTO, right? Whereas many years ago it was you had to be here for a year before you got into vacation, or you had to be here, and it was very little vacation, so things like that where we're valuing their time at home and their mental health and their family health so that they can be a good employee. And then we do a lot of things like family or get-togethers. We have our Christmas celebration every year. We give bonuses. A lot of times when we really haven't performed like we should give the bonus that we did, so we really want to make sure that the employees and their families are taken care of, and that they look at Porter Steel as part of their family, and that we are invested in them and not just the bottom line.
Yeah, good. With your dad, and just what changes have you seen just in management style expectations? What about his letting? I have a question in terms of just his letting go, because from '77 until 2014, that's a long time to be fully immersed, and he's pretty much let go now, and then a second question is the separation between the personal relationships. The holidays, was it all business, or how did you do that?
I can speak to what Cole said, and the Thanksgiving buffet line becomes, did you renew that account? Did you call him back? Is that handled? Yes, Dad.
During the holidays,
all the time,
or the weekends, or whatever.
Well, probably the biggest challenge I have personally, he and I both, is that separation. I mean, whether or not we are coworkers or family, it just melds. There's almost no dividing line sometimes.
Right.
And it is very hard. You have to be very deliberate about it. My mother would just look at us and be like, okay, that's enough. But granted, she was in the insurance industry when she worked. That's how they met. So, she understood what we were talking about, which was kind of fun. But it's there's been a good bit of change as far as that transition of letting go. We've had to do things. I mean, technology has changed so much of it. Our big challenge from when he was running the business to where we are now, there's so much electronic communication that the personal relationship is lost. Email and text is efficient, but it's not personable. And we've had to evolve with the volume and the speed of work, and still try to reach back to those past days and maintain those relationships. COVID's been that was a very difficult time for us because we couldn't go see anybody. And insurance is, all you're doing is selling paper. I mean, no one wants to read what's on it. So you got to have a little something more than that. There's got to be a relationship there that people know you're going to take care of them. And, that was what his generation was always about.
Right.
And now as it's changing, we're trying to balance holding on to that with the efficiencies that we have to have.
Yeah, because in your world, you have either a laptop or a workstation, cell phone, and DocuSign. You're good to go.
Yeah.
I mean, just in terms of taking care of the basic blocking and tackling of taking care of your customers.
Correct.
On the technical side, but
you have to slow down to humanize them.
You do. So, but your producers, they get that because that's what they're
absolutely.
That's what they're built for. That's what they do.
That's one of our biggest things now is training. As we've moved through one generation to the next, basically, all of the employees that I grew up with have retired, and we've hired this new generation. It's amazing what they value, how different it is, and then what you have to remind them of. That, pick up the phone. Don't send 50 emails. Just pick up the phone, and in 5 minutes, it's over.
Right.
the idea will be explained.
Yes.
The message will be received, and you don't have to waste maybe 2 days back and forth, and it's just generational how they want to operate, and then what's best, I guess.
Yeah, it's true. That's true. That is very different, because at your dad's age, it was signing stacks of forms, and you literally had to be with people, to do that.
And to speak on what Cole was talking about earlier with valuing your employees and making them appreciate where they work, there's a lot to that now. Work balance is a lot. Work-life balance is something that they really come for. We've tried very hard to communicate all those things and make sure we have the best policies, but it's a challenge.
Right.
It surely is.
All right, so I'm going to ask you guys for some personal advice. So, because here's my situation, I'm the guy in the office that not really anymore, but up until 3-4 years ago, I knew how to do everything in the office. Okay, it's not that what I was doing was good, bad, or otherwise. It's just what I'd learned. You learn these default habits that get it done, even though they may not be good ones or efficient ones or whatever. It just works. It's like, and so I'm trying to figure out how to let go well. I don't quite have that one mastered, but Stephanie, that works for us, maybe you've seen an email from her, I don't know, but she's my niece. Okay, she's born in 1980. All right. Her dad and my brothers have been gone 15 years. I've done what I can for her sister and brother to. I can't be their dad, but I can be their uncle, right? But now we work together. I hired her 4 years ago. She's outstanding in the operations role, just checklist, very good at workflow process and compliance and HR and some things like this that she's responsible for. But 3 years ago, she said to me that you're difficult to work with and difficult to work for. It's like, okay. And so it's like, all right, I need to take notes, maybe whatever, right? And then a few months ago, she said that there were some things that she was not sharing because I'm her uncle, that if I was just her boss, she would. I was like, okay. So, there's just this.
I think
give me
some
some
of
advice.
That,
give me some advice here.
That was, my father was the same way. But he and I had a very open channel of communication.
Yeah.
I mean, he knew how to do everything until I started to put the technology in place that he didn't know how or care to know how to work. And the other side of that is you get into just being open to learning, and whether he ever wanted to let go of something, I don't know. It's just, right. I just kept pushing, and eventually he had to yield. It was one of those where we kept going, and what he wanted to keep up with, he did. Yeah. It's a challenge. It surely is.
Yeah, it is. Any advice for me?
That's really tough, because I'm probably closer to her end of it. I would say that, I think my attitude in my life, and I hope I always have it, and I hope people hold me accountable to always have it, is that I always want to learn, and I always want to improve myself, and to not be set on my way is the only way.
Right.
And also, I don't want to surround myself with yes men. I want people to tell me when they disagree with me. So, I think from your perspective, I would say that you just need to be open and give her the space to really voice the things that are concerns of hers. And they may be unreasonable. Like, they may be things that you guys just have to talk through. But they may be some things that kind of open your eyes to some ways you can improve, or to at least see that the perspective of her coming from her generation and her position that she's in, because I think it's really hard when we as leaders, when we create a situation where people don't think that we're approachable, because then you're really dangerous in the fact that you're going to miss a lot of things that could have been brought to your attention, but people were afraid to bring them to your attention. And so that's one of my biggest concerns, is making sure that people always feel like that I'm approachable, and that also that I listen and that I hear them. Even if I make a decision that's not the one they would have made, at least that they see that I considered their perspective, and showed some level of empathy for where they're at. So
that's good. That's good advice from both of you, because that's because it's one of those business things. I mean, you both have the same experience. Whatever it is we each do on the business side, I'm comfortable doing it. Done it for decades. It's whatever, just do this. But that thing of letting go, transitioning responsibilities, listening well. I still study it. It's So thanks for the input. As we wrap up, any 2 or 3 pieces of advice to first generation owners who really have a heart for transferring to the second generation, whether it's a family member or not? Just any 2 or 3 pieces of advice to first generation owners about what they can do to make that transition easy or simple for the next generation of ownership.
Simple and easy is probably not how I'd describe it, but the main thing is to be very open and honest about intentions and how the process works, because a lot of businesses that you may have the heart to transfer it, but financially it may not make sense. It may not be. You really have to assess who your second generation is, and are they capable, and can you make yourself available, even after the transition, to mentor them and continue to help them. I mean, my father, I talk to him every day, and he's retiring December 31st, and he's my sounding board for everything. And
cool.
So without that, would I be where I am? Probably not. Absolutely not.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. It's good that you've maintained that relationship on both the personal business side, and he's giving you the freedom and flexibility to do what to do what you do. That is good. That's good. Cool.
I would just say that if you are a business owner, I really see that as one of your greatest opportunities in life to make an impact in the next generations after you, and not even looking at necessarily your children, but thinking about your grandchildren and their children. I think that it's such a honor and a legacy that you can create by planning well, and you can't just leave the asset, right? You have to, along with that goes the teaching and the stewardship and the connecting the second generation with the knowledge that they need to succeed going into the future. I think a lot of businesses in second and third generation fail because it's simply a transfer of assets. And if you look at it that way, I think it's really dangerous, because they don't have the experience that you do. They have different experiences, but not the same ones. And so if you steward it right, it can be such an impactful thing for many, many generations to come. And I think that's such a great thing. So I would just encourage people to look at that. And then also, any deal that you make or structure that you make, it can't just be good for you. It's got to be good for the next generations. And so you have to keep their interests in mind. You are operating from a position of power when you're holding the business, but I think that you really have to consider what makes sense for their long-term success and the success of their children and their children, and not be so focused on just the present day, although there is obviously that focus, but you got to look forward.
Good. Guys, thanks so much. I'm here in the studio with Drew Gilbreath of Sutter, Mclellan Gilbreath Insurance Agency, Cole Porter Steel. Guys, thanks so much for being with us these last 2 episodes. I'm Randy Brunson, Centurion Advisor Group, wrapping up this episode of Stewarding Family Wealth on Gwinnett Business RadioX. Thanks all.